The auction was supposed to be simple. A few horses, some land, maybe a mule or two. But when the auctioneer dragged that hooded figure onto the wooden platform, hands bound, head down, not making a single sound, the entire crowd went quiet. Nobody bid. Not because they didn't want to, but because something about her felt wrong to them, like bad luck wrapped in burlap, like a curse you didn't want to bring home. One man spat on the ground. Another laughed. Someone in the back muttered something dark, something cruel, and the crowd chuckled like it was a joke at a saloon. But at the far edge of that crowd, a cowboy stood alone. He hadn't come to Red Rock Flats for an auction. He hadn't come for trouble either. He'd ridden 3 days through open desert just to buy a horse and disappear again, the way he always did. He had $1 silver in his coat pocket. And for reasons he couldn't explain, not then, not ever, he raised his hand. $1. Nobody challenged it. Nobody even looked surprised. They were just glad someone else was taking the problem off their hands. The auctioneer smacked his gavel down and moved on like nothing had happened. And when the cowboy walked up to the platform, when he reached out and lifted that hood from her face for the first time, she flinched like she expected to be hit. Instead, he just looked at her. And in a voice barely louder than the desert wind, she whispered something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. No one has ever chosen me before. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Sending love your way. Drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. Because what happened next, nobody in Red Rock Flats saw coming. His name was Cole Briggs. And the first thing you needed to know about Cole Briggs was that he didn't talk much. Not because he was shy. Not because he didn't have words. But because somewhere along the way, he had learned that words cost more than people realized. And he wasn't a man who liked owing anything to anyone. He was 34 years old, though he looked 40 in the sunlight and 20 in the dark. His face was weathered the way old wood gets when the rain and the heat take turns with it. Not broken, but shaped by everything it had survived. He wore a gray duster that had once been black, boots that were repaired so many times the original leather was more memory than material, and a hat with a crease in the brim from the time a bullet came closer than it should have. He didn't wear a badge. He didn't ride for anyone. Cole Briggs was what people in the West called a drifter, and what Cole himself called free. He'd been a ranch hand, cattle driver. For 6 terrible months, he'd ridden with a bounty crew, and he'd quit the morning he saw what the crew's leader did to a man who was already in chains. He never spoke about those 6 months. He never would. Now he moved from town to town, working enough to eat, saving enough to keep riding, and staying just long enough to remind himself why he never stayed. He'd arrived in Red Rock Flats on a Thursday, 2 hours before sundown, with dust on his shoulders and a dry throat and nothing on his mind but water and a horse. Red Rock Flats was the kind of town that looked like it was slowly losing an argument with the desert. The buildings leaned. The streets were unpaved and pale as bone. There was one saloon, one general store, a church with a broken bell, and a sheriff's office with a locked door that nobody seemed to have the key to anymore. The auction was happening in the town square, which was really just a wide gap between buildings where people gathered when there was something worth gathering for. Cole had walked past it on his way to the water trough. He wasn't planning to stop. But then the crowd went quiet. That kind of quiet is different from regular quiet. Regular quiet is just the absence of noise. This kind of quiet has weight, presses on your chest. It makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up like something in the air changed temperature. Cole stopped walking. He turned. The figure on the platform was small, wrapped in a rough brown cloak, hood pulled down so low that nothing was visible. Not a face, not a chin, not even a strand of hair. The hands in front were bound with rope, not loosely the way you tie a horse's lead, but tightly, deliberately, the way you tied something you were afraid might run. The auctioneer, a fat man in a sweat-soaked vest, was talking fast and loud, the way auctioneers do when they're nervous about something not selling. He kept using words like acquisition and opportunity and rare circumstance, which was just his way of saying he had no idea what he was selling or who this person was or where she'd come from. Nobody was bidding. Cole watched the crowd. He was good at reading people, not because he was smart in any schoolhouse way, but because he'd spent his whole life in situations where misreading a person could get you killed. And what he read in that crowd was something that bothered him more than he wanted to admit. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't disinterest. It was contempt. These people looked at that hooded figure the way you look at something you've already decided has no value. Already decided doesn't deserve anything. Not cruelty, not kindness. Just nothing. The auctioneer dropped the price again. Then again. Finally, in desperation, he threw his arms up and said, $1. Someone give me $1 and take this off my hands. People laughed. Cole reached into his coat pocket. He felt the silver dollar there, cool, smooth, the weight of it familiar. It was the last money he had. He'd planned to use it toward a horse. He needed a horse. The one he'd ridden in on had gone lame outside of Dusty Creek, and he'd walked the last 11 miles in boots that weren't made for walking. He looked at the platform again. The figure hadn't moved, hadn't looked up, hadn't made a sound through any of it. Not through the mockery, not through the lowered prices, not through the laughter. That stillness said more to Cole than anything the auctioneer was shouting. He raised his hand. The laughter stopped. The auctioneer blinked like he wasn't sure he'd seen right. $1, Cole said. Flat. Calm. Not a question. Sold? The auctioneer said quickly. Before Cole could change his mind. Cole walked up to the platform. The crowd parted for him, not out of respect, more out of curiosity. He stepped up onto the wooden boards. He reached out slowly and pushed the hood back from the figure's face. She flinched hard. Her whole body jerked backward, shoulders pulling in, like she'd been trained to expect impact whenever a hand came near her head. But no impact came. Cole just looked at her. She was young. Younger than he'd expected, mid-20s maybe, though her eyes looked older. Her face was angular and pale, with a thin scar that ran from her left cheekbone down to the corner of her jaw. Her hair was dark and tangled. Her eyes, when she finally raised them, were the color of deep water, gray-green and bottomless and terrified. She stared at him for a long moment. Then her lips moved. He had to lean in to hear it. No one has ever chosen me before. Cole straightened up. He looked at the rope on her wrists. He pulled out a small knife from his belt. The crowd tensed and cut it clean. He didn't say anything. He just stepped off the platform. And after a moment's hesitation, she followed. And that was how it began. Her name was Nora. That was the only thing she told him in the first hour. Not a last name. Just Nora, spoken quietly, like even the syllables were something she wasn't sure she was allowed to keep. Cole didn't push. He bought 2 cups of coffee from the general store. The woman behind the counter watched Nora like she was something dangerous, and they sat on the steps outside in the long afternoon shadow and drank them without talking. He noticed things. The way Nora held her cup with both hands even though it was warm out. The way her eyes swept the street constantly, tracking movement, tracking exits. The way she sat angled slightly toward the open road, like some part of her body was always preparing to run. He'd seen that posture before, in men who'd spent time in prison, in men who'd survived things they never talked about in daylight. After a while, he asked her one question. "You have somewhere to go?" She looked at him. Then she looked at the road. Then she looked back at him. "No," she said. Cole nodded slowly and finished his coffee. He could have left it there. Should have, probably. A smart man would have tipped his hat and walked away and told himself he'd done enough. Bought her freedom, cut her ropes, given her a cup of coffee. That was more than most would do. But Cole Briggs had never been accused of being a smart man. While Nora sat on the steps, Cole went back into the general store and started asking quiet questions. The woman behind the counter, Mrs. Aldridge, wide and sharp-eyed, was reluctant at first. But Cole had a way of being patient that made people uncomfortable with silence, and eventually Mrs. Aldridge started talking. What she said made Cole's jaw tighten. Nora had been brought into Red Rock Flats 3 days ago. Not by family. Not by her own choice. She'd been brought in by a man named Dolan Reese. And that name landed on Cole's ears like a stone dropped into still water. Dolan Reese. Cole knew the name. Most people west of the Pecos did. Reese ran what people politely called a labor operation and what everyone privately called slavery with paperwork. He moved people, mostly women, sometimes men, from one desperate situation to another, collecting fees from both ends. He had connections with crooked judges, crooked sheriffs, and men who had money and no conscience. He operated just close enough to legal to make it hard to stop him. And anyone who tried to stop him directly had a way of quietly disappearing. Mrs. Aldridge said Reese had brought Nora in claiming she owed him a debt. Money borrowed, labor unpaid. The exact story changed depending on who asked. He'd arranged the auction himself. The sheriff, she said with a look that said everything, had been very cooperative. She's not the first, Mrs. Aldridge said, lowering her voice. And she won't be the last. Reese runs through here every few months. Takes someone. Leaves someone. Like a tax the town pays and pretends not to know about. Cole looked out the window at Nora sitting on the steps, still holding her coffee cup. Where's Reese now? He asked. Gone. Left this morning. But Mrs. Aldridge hesitated. He'll know by nightfall what happened at the auction. Word travels fast when Reese is involved. He has people watching. People here in town? The woman's eyes dropped to the counter. That was answer enough. Cole bought a small bag of dried food, some matches, and a canteen. He paid with the last of his credit. He had no money left now, not a cent, and went back outside. He sat down next to Nora again. Dolan Reese, he said. She didn't react the way most people would. She didn't flinch or cry. Her face went very still, very flat, the way a person's face goes when they've learned that emotion is a luxury they can't afford. He'll come looking, she said. I know. He doesn't stop. She turned to look at Cole directly for the first time. You should understand that. He doesn't stop. And the men he sends, they're not good men. Cole looked back at her steadily. Neither is Red Rock Flats, he said. And we're still sitting here. Something moved across her face then. Not quite a smile. Something smaller, quieter. Like the idea of a smile seen from far away. I don't understand you, she said. That's all right, Cole replied. I don't understand myself most days. He stood up and looked at the road leading out of town. The long, pale road that stretched toward the Red Rock Hills to the west, where the shadows were already growing long and dark. We should move before sundown, he said. Nora stood. She pulled what was left of her cloak tighter around her shoulders. She looked at the town one last time. The leaning buildings, the pale streets, the faces that had watched her on that platform and felt nothing. Then she turned her back on all of it. And together they walked. What neither of them saw was the figure in the upstairs window of the saloon, watching them go. The figure who immediately reached for a pen and paper. They made camp 6 miles outside of Red Rock Flats, in a shallow wash between 2 red rock formations where the wind dropped and the darkness came down thick and complete. Cole built a small fire, small enough to give heat, small enough not to be seen from a distance. He'd learned that years ago. Big fires were for people who thought they were safe. Small fires were for people who knew better. Nora sat across from him, knees pulled to her chest, watching the flames. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The desert at night has its own kind of conversation. The creak of cooling rock, the distant call of something moving in the dark, the whisper of wind through dry brush. Cole had always found it easier to breathe out here than in town. Towns felt like pressure. The open desert felt like space to think. He'd been thinking hard since they left Red Rock Flats. He had no horse, no money. He had a knife, a revolver with 11 bullets, the bag of dried food, a canteen, and a woman who Dolan Reese would send men after. Not because Reese particularly cared about Nora, men like Reese didn't care about people, but because letting her walk away set a precedent. And precedents were bad for business. Cole had walked into something tonight. He knew that. The smart thing, the self-preserving thing, was to get Nora to the next town, point her toward whatever safety existed there, and disappear back into the horizon. He kept telling himself that. He kept not believing it. Across the fire, Nora spoke. The scar, she said. He looked at her. She was touching the scar on her face. Not self-consciously, more like she was checking it was still there. People always look at it, she said. You didn't. Cole thought about that. I was looking at your eyes, he said simply. She lowered her hand. Reese gave it to me, she said. 2 years ago. I tried to run. He caught me in 3 days. She paused. He was almost gentle about it after. That was the worst part. Like it was just business. Cole watched the fire. How long? He asked. 3 years. She said it without drama. He found me after my father died. I had debts, real ones, not the kind Reese invents. He offered to help. That's how it starts. He offers to help. The fire snapped and sent a small cascade of sparks upward into the dark sky. There were others, she continued. Women mostly. Some moved on to what I never knew. Some just disappeared. Reese would say they'd found new arrangements. I stopped asking eventually. Smart, Cole said quietly. Survival, she corrected. He nodded. There was a difference. He understood that difference down to his bones. Why did you buy me? She asked then. Straight, direct, no softness around the question. And don't say you don't know. I've been watching you. You're not a man who doesn't know why he does things. Cole was quiet for a moment. He added a small stick to the fire. There was a woman, he said finally. 7 years ago, before I drifted. She was in a situation, not the same as yours but similar enough. And I walked past. He paused. I told myself it wasn't my problem. Told myself she had people who could help. I wrote on. What happened to her? I found out 2 weeks later. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The desert wind moved around them. The fire breathed. I'm not her, Nora said. I know, Cole said. I'm not something for you to fix to make yourself feel better about that. The words were sharp, but her voice wasn't unkind. It was just honest. And Cole had always respected honesty more than comfort. You're right, he said. You're not. She studied him for a long moment across the dancing light of the small fire. Then what am I? She asked. He looked at her then, really looked at her. At the hard lines of a face that had survived things it shouldn't have had to. At the eyes that were watchful and deep and still, somewhere inside, achingly human. Right now, he said. You're someone sitting by my fire. That's enough. Nora was quiet for a very long time. Okay, she said finally. They took turns keeping watch. Cole took the first shift while Nora slept curled tight against the rock wall, and he sat with his back to the fire so his eyes could adjust to the dark and see what the dark was hiding. He counted stars. He listened, and around the second hour of his watch, far back in the direction of Red Rock Flats, he saw it. A light, moving. Not one light. 3. Riders. Moving fast, torches carried low. Cole didn't panic. He put his hand gently on Nora's shoulder and she was awake instantly. No groggy confusion, no slow surfacing. She woke like someone who had learned that sleeping too deeply was dangerous. She saw his face. She didn't ask questions. She was already moving. They moved through darkness the way animals move, low, quiet, using the terrain instead of fighting it. Cole knew the Red Rock country only slightly. He'd passed through once, maybe 4 years back, riding south for reasons he'd long forgotten. But he remembered the general shape of it. The deep gullies, the sudden drops, the narrow passages between rock faces that could swallow a man and his horse if he wasn't careful. He was counting on that. The 3 riders were maybe a mile back. Close enough to be a problem. Far enough that Cole and Nora had options, if they moved right and didn't panic. Nora didn't panic. That continued to strike him. Most people in danger, even experienced people, showed something. Fear, adrenaline, the ragged breathing that came when the body understood it might not survive the next hour. Nora's breathing was controlled. Her feet found quiet ground. She stayed 2 steps behind him, close enough to react to his signals, far enough not to crowd him. She'd done this before. Running in the dark. Moving silently. Surviving. Cole navigated by memory and instinct, angling northwest toward a section of canyon he half remembered. A narrow passage, maybe 8 feet wide at most, with sheer walls on both sides that would funnel anything coming through it into a single file line. 3 men on horseback in open terrain were a serious threat. 3 men forced through a passage one at a time were a different calculation. He didn't like what he was calculating. He'd spent years trying to build a life, however small, however drifting, that kept him away from moments like this. He wasn't a violent man by nature. He was a violent man by circumstance, which he'd always believed was different. But circumstance didn't care much about his preferences tonight. The canyon entrance appeared out of the darkness like a wound in the rock. A gap just wide enough, the walls rising sheer on both sides, the path through it pale and winding. They entered at a jog. Behind them, the torchlight was getting closer. Cole picked a point about a third of the way through the passage, a section where the wall curved slightly, creating a shallow alcove on the left side. He pointed Nora to the opposite wall, low, in the shadow. He pressed himself into the alcove with his back flat against the stone. He drew his revolver. He didn't plan to shoot first. He never shot first if there was another way. But he was clear-eyed about what he'd do if there wasn't. They waited. The sound of hooves in a canyon at night is something that gets inside your chest. It echoes and multiplies, so it sounds like more horses than there are, coming from more directions than they are. It fills the air completely. It makes your heartbeat feel irrelevant by comparison. The first rider came through at a walk, cautious, torch held up, scanning. Cole could see him clearly in the torchlight. Big man, white hat. The kind of build that suggested he'd spent his life doing things that hurt other people and had decided he liked it. He had a rifle across his saddle and a pistol on his hip, and he was looking for 2 people on foot, and he never thought to look at the shadow in the wall right beside him. Cole let him pass. The second rider was closer behind than he'd expected. Cole pressed himself harder against the stone, and the horse passed close enough that he could have touched the saddle. The second man was smaller, nervous. His torch was shaking slightly, and his head was swiveling left and right like a bird looking for cats. Cole waited. Third rider. This one stopped. Right in the passage. Right between Cole's position and where Nora was hiding. The rider lifted his torch high and turned in the saddle, slow. Cole realized the man had seen something. A shadow that didn't match, a shape that wasn't rock. He stepped out of the alcove. "Drop the torch," Cole said. "Quiet. No shouting. In a canyon at night, you didn't need volume." The rider spun, reached for his pistol. Cole moved faster, not shooting, but closing the distance in 3 quick steps and grabbing the man's wrist before the gun was fully drawn. He used the horse's momentum against the rider, pulling him off balance, and in the chaos the torch hit the canyon floor and went out. Darkness. The other 2 riders were already shouting. The horses were panicking in the confined space. That mattered. Horses in a panic in a narrow canyon are as dangerous to their riders as anything else. Cole hit the third man once, hard, with the butt of his revolver. The man went sideways off his horse and hit the canyon floor with a sound that meant he'd be down for a while. The horse bolted forward, crashing into the darkness toward the other 2 riders, adding to the chaos. Cole grabbed Nora's hand in the dark. She grabbed back without hesitation. They ran. Not through the canyon, back out. The way they'd come. While the 3 riders were tangled in confusion and panicked horses and darkness, Cole and Nora moved back out into the open desert, angled north, and put as much ground between themselves and that canyon as their legs could manage. They ran for 20 minutes, then walked, then stopped behind a low ridge, breathing hard, listening. No pursuit. Not yet. Cole looked at Nora. Her chest was heaving, her hair wild, her eyes bright in the faint starlight. "There'll be more," she said, reading his thoughts. "Yes," he said. "Reese will send more." "Yes." She looked out at the vast darkness of the desert spreading before them. "Then we can't just run," she said. Cole holstered his revolver. He looked at the stars, reading direction the way men learned to read things when there were no roads and no signs. "No," he said slowly. "We can't." He turned to face her. "I need to know everything you know about Dolan Reese." Nora looked at him for a long moment, and then she started talking. They walked through the night and she talked. Not like someone unburdening a confession. Not fragile, not tearful. She talked the way a soldier talks about a campaign. methodically, with precision, leaving nothing important out and adding no drama to things that were already dramatic enough on their own. Cole listened. He was good at listening. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer comfort or commentary. He just took in what she said and filed it away where it would be useful. Dolan Reese operated out of a town called Sulphur Creek, 40 miles northeast. It wasn't much of a town. Maybe 60 people, a trading post, and a large ranch that Reese had bought 3 years ago with money that came from directions nobody asked about. The ranch was where he kept his operation. For buildings behind the main house, staff who were really guards, and enough influence over the surrounding territory that local law enforcement had long ago decided that working with Reese was safer than working against him. He had 12 men on his regular payroll. Not all of them were violent. Some were clerks, bookkeepers, middlemen who kept the paperwork side of his operation clean enough to survive inspection. But 6 of them were hired specifically for situations like this one. Men who were good at finding people, good at not caring what happened when they found them. The 3 in the canyon tonight were 3 of those 6. Nora knew the ranch. She knew the layout, the routines, the patterns, which guards walked which paths, which buildings were locked and which weren't, where Reese spent his evenings, and most importantly, where he kept the documents. The ledgers, the contracts, the records of every transaction, every person, every bribed official. That's what he's really afraid of, Nora said. They were crossing a flat stretch of pale earth now, the night sky enormous above them. Not losing me, not losing one person. He's afraid of those records. Why? Cole asked. Because he's not just operating in 3 territories anymore, she said. He's been expanding, moving north. New investors, men with real money and real names, names that people would recognize. Men who would not survive the scandal. Cole absorbed that. And you've seen these records. I've seen enough. I was used as a courier once. He trusted me after a while. He thought I'd given up. A pause. He was almost right. What changed? She didn't answer immediately. They walked in silence for a while, their footsteps soft on the dry earth. There was a girl, she said finally, brought in last spring, 15, maybe 16. She reminded me of my younger sister. Her voice didn't crack, but it slowed. It became very careful, the way you are with something you've decided not to drop. She lasted 2 months. Then she was gone. And Reese didn't even... She stopped, breathed. He didn't even note it. In his ledger, just a line crossed out, like a math problem solved. Cole said nothing. Sometimes silence was the only honest response. I started planning after that, Nora continued. The problem was I had no one, no allies, no money, no way to move the information even if I got it. I made one attempt at escape and you know how that ended. She touched the scar without thinking. When Reese put me up for auction in Red Rock Flats, I think he was making a point, showing me that even at my lowest, he controlled the outcome. He was wrong about that, Cole said. $1, she said. And there was something in those 2 words that was more than just the amount. Cole had been thinking while she talked, turning possibilities over, examining them, discarding the ones that didn't hold up under pressure. They couldn't run indefinitely. They had no money, no horse, limited supplies. The desert was not a place that forgave prolonged wandering. And Reese's men would regroup by morning and the search would expand. Running was losing slowly. You said you know where the records are kept, Cole said. Inside the main house, his office, back room, bottom drawer of a locked cabinet. He wears the key on a chain. She paused. You're thinking about going there. You have a better idea? She considered. It's 40 miles. We'd never... There's a trading post at Black Mesa Ridge, he said. 7 miles north. I passed it years ago. If it's still running, there'll be horses. Maybe credit if the owner's a reasonable man. And if he's not? Cole was quiet for a moment. Then we figure something else out. Nora looked at him with an expression that was hard to read entirely. Part skepticism, part something else. Something that looked almost like it wanted to be trust but wasn't quite there yet. You're going to go after Reese, she said. Not a question. We're going to go after Reese, he corrected. Why? She stopped walking. He stopped too and turned to face her. The stars were thick overhead, the desert silent around them, and she looked at him with those deep-water eyes in the faint gray light of the night. "Why would you do this? You don't know me. You owe me nothing. $1 bought my freedom, Cole. That's done. You could leave right now and I couldn't blame you. So why?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Because he crossed out a line in a ledger," Cole said. And somehow, she understood exactly what he meant. They stood there in the dark desert for another few seconds. Then she nodded. Once, slow, like something had been decided between them that didn't need more words. They turned north, toward Black Mesa Ridge, toward Sulphur Creek, toward Dolan Reese. Neither of them said it aloud, but they both understood. What came next was not the kind of thing you walked away from unchanged. If you walked away at all. They reached Black Mesa Ridge trading post as the sky was turning that particular shade of deep blue that meant sunrise was still an hour away, but night had already started saying goodbye. The owner's name was Hector, a lean Mexican man in his 50s with a gray beard and eyes that had seen enough of life to be neither easily surprised nor easily fooled. He'd heard of Cole, not by reputation, but through a letter from a rancher Cole had helped 3 years back. And in that letter, apparently, Cole had been described as a man who could be trusted. Sometimes the small things you do cast longer shadows than you realize. Hector gave them 2 horses, not the best horses he had, but good enough. He gave them trail food, ammunition, and a rough map of the territory between Black Mesa Ridge and Sulphur Creek. He asked no questions beyond what was necessary. When Cole said they'd settle the debt as soon as they were able, Hector just nodded. "My wife was someone's property once," Hector said quietly, as they were preparing to leave. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. They rode. The route Hector's map showed kept them off the main road and moved them through broken terrain, arroyos, dry creek beds, stretches of scrub forest that gave cover. It added time but reduced the chance of being seen by Reese's men, who would now be riding the open roads. They reached the outskirts of Sulphur Creek in the late afternoon. From a ridge above the town, they studied it. Cole had his hat pulled low and a pair of field glasses Hector had also lent them. He scanned slowly. The town was small and quiet in the way that places are quiet when they're afraid rather than peaceful. People moved fast, heads down. The trading post had its shutters half-closed even in daylight. A group of men on horseback sat outside the saloon, not relaxed, not drinking, watching. The Reese Ranch sat on the eastern edge of town, behind a low fence. For buildings as Nora had described. The main house was large, white-painted, almost elegant compared to the rest of Sulphur Creek. The kind of house that was meant to say, "I am legitimate, I am established, I belong here." Cole handed Nora the glasses. She studied the ranch for a long time. "The guards' rotation," she said quietly. 2 on the fence, 1 at the front door. Around back there should be 1 more, but he tends to find shade in the afternoon. I learned his habits. Where will Reese be? If he's back from Red Rock Flats, and he will be by now, he'll be in his office. He always works in the afternoon. He has that kind of discipline. She lowered the glasses. "There's a door on the west side of the house. I used to use it when he sent me on errands. It leads directly to a hallway, and the hallway leads to the back of the office." Cole thought. He thought for a long time, turning the angles, the risks, the possibilities. "We don't hurt anyone we don't have to," he said. "Agreed. We get the records. We get out. Then we need someone to take them to," Nora said. "Someone who can actually do something with them. The wrong person and Reese just buys them back or makes them disappear." Cole had been turning that problem over for hours. "There's a federal circuit judge," he said. "Name of Ambrose Gale. Rides the Western Territories twice a year. I met him once, a long time ago, different circumstances. He's the kind of man who takes evidence seriously. You trust him." "I trust that he hates men like Reese on principle. Sometimes that's enough." Nora handed back the field glasses. They waited until the sun was low and the shadows were long. That hour when light gets complicated and the eye plays tricks and men who are supposed to be watching sometimes lose focus. Then they moved. They left the horses behind the ridge, tethered with water. Cole checked his revolver, all chambers loaded. He looked at Nora. She had found, in the pack Hector had given them, a small folding knife. She held it in her hand with the comfortable ease of someone who had decided, somewhere along the long road of the past 3 years, that she would never again be without something to defend herself. She saw him noticing. "I'm not standing behind you on this," she said. "I know," he said. They moved down off the ridge together. The west side door opened silently. Nora had remembered correctly. The hallway was dim, smelling of tobacco and wood polish. Their footsteps were careful, measured, controlled. The sound of a voice from the office stopped them cold. 2 voices, Reese and someone else. A conversation in low tones. Cole pressed against the wall and listened. The second voice was one he didn't recognize, calm, educated, the kind of voice that belonged to a man who had never needed to shout because everything and everyone around him had always done what he said. He was talking about the expansion, the northern routes, the new names on the ledger. Cole looked at Nora. Her eyes were steady. He reached out and very slowly pushed the office door open 2 inches. He saw Dolan Reese for the first time. Reese was exactly what Cole had expected, and somehow still a surprise. He was a man of ordinary appearance. Medium height, neat gray hair, a clean suit. The kind of face you'd see at a church social and not think twice about. Which was, Cole understood immediately, exactly the point. The most dangerous things always wore ordinary faces. The man across from him had his back to the door. Cole pushed the door all the way open and stepped inside. Both men looked up. Reese's face went through several things in rapid succession. Surprise, calculation, and then a very controlled stillness that was more frightening than alarm. "Mr. Reese," Cole said, "I believe you have something in that cabinet that belongs to the world." Reese looked at Cole. Then his eyes moved past Cole and found Nora standing in the doorway. For just a moment, the barest fraction of a second, something moved across Reese's face that wasn't quite what Cole expected. It wasn't rage. It was something that looked, impossibly, like respect. Like he finally understood that he'd miscalculated. The other man in the room began to rise from his chair. Cole raised his revolver. "Sit down," he said. "This won't take long." The cabinet key was on the chain around Reese's neck, just as Nora had said. Cole took it. He opened the cabinet. He took every document inside. 3 leather folders, thick with papers, thick with names and numbers and the written record of years of human suffering neatly organized into columns. He didn't read them there. There wasn't time. Reese didn't try to stop him. The other man didn't either. Cole had the revolver, and more importantly, he had a steadiness about him that communicated something difficult to argue with, that he had already decided what he would do if this went wrong, and he wasn't afraid of that decision. They backed out of the room. They walked down the hallway. They went out the west side door. And they ran. 2 of Reese's men spotted them before they reached the ridge. There were shots, 2 of them, both wide, both more warning than aim. Cole didn't return fire. He just ran. And Nora ran beside him, matching his stride, and they hit the ridge and got to the horses and were riding before the men below could get organized. They rode through the night. 40 miles south, they found Federal Circuit Judge Ambrose Gale in the town of Mesa Crow, where he was scheduled to hold proceedings the following morning. He was a weathered man in his 60s who read through the documents Cole brought him in 3 hours of careful silence, and then looked up with an expression that was somewhere between fury and grim satisfaction. "This," the judge said, "is enough." It was enough. The proceedings that followed took months. Reese's operation was dismantled piece by piece. 4 officials in 2 territories lost their positions. 7 of the men on Reese's payroll were arrested. The investors, the respectable names, the ones with money and reputations, faced consequences that sent very clear messages to everyone who thought themselves untouchable. Dolan Reese himself was convicted. The judge ensured it. Cole wasn't there for any of it. He was already gone, drifting again, moving west the way he always moved. He'd stayed long enough to see the documents in the right hands. That was enough for him. But before he left Mesa Crow, on the morning he rode out, Nora found him at the stable. She'd been offered something by the federal authorities. A relocation, a new name, A quiet life somewhere that Reese's remaining connections couldn't find her. She was going to take it. She'd told him that the night before, and he'd told her she should. She stood in the stable doorway and looked at him. He looked at her. "Thank you," she said. He shook his head slightly. "You did this," he said. "You carried 3 years of that. You remembered every detail. You walked through that door." He settled into the saddle. "I just raised my hand." She was quiet for a moment. $1, she said. $1, he agreed. He turned the horse toward the open road. "Cole." Her voice, behind him. He looked back. "I hope wherever you drift to," she said. "You're not running from yourself anymore." He held her gaze for a moment. Then something changed in his face. Not a smile exactly. Something quieter. Something that looked like peace seen from far away. He rode. The desert opened up before him, vast and gold in the early light, indifferent and magnificent, the way the West always was. The kind of country that didn't care who you'd been, only what you did next. $1. That's what it cost. And sometimes that's all it takes. One small choice, one raised hand, one moment when you decide that looking away is something you're no longer willing to do. The question isn't whether you have the money. The question is whether you have the courage. What would you have done in his place? If the story moved you, drop a comment below. Share it with someone who believes one person can make a difference. And if you're new here, welcome. There are more stories where this came from. Stories about courage, survival, and the quiet thunder of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. The West was full of them. So is the world.